A transit group has a long list of ideas on how to make transit safer. The Canadian Urban Transit Association has published a list of 27 recommendations to respond to a recent spate of violent attacks on public transit. The association says more security officers are needed and they need to have more power to stop dangerous behavior. It also recommends that homelessness, substance use, and mental health be addressed to improve safety for transit riders. And for more on this, I'm joined by John McMull, the Communications and Public Affairs Director with the Canadian Urban Transit Association. Thanks so much for being here, John.
Thanks for having me.
Let's start with outlining what some of these recommendations are, because transit right now is a hot button issue. A lot of people are worried about safety when they ride, for example, the TTC or GO Transit each and every day. So what is your organization suggesting?
First, let me say that violence has no place on Canada's public transit systems. We set up a transit safety task force to look at some of the root causes of violence and come up with some real-world solutions. You mentioned the 27 recommendations. Some are recommendations that transit agencies and all levels of government can implement in the short term, and that includes continued investment in safety, security, and enforcement positions. But we also have to address some of the broader societal issues that we see playing out on public transit, and that includes issues of homelessness, substance use, and mental health, and those impact riders and workers. And dealing with those broad issues requires that all levels of government need to come to the table with appropriate support. Transit agencies need additional support to have outreach workers on transit so that people who need help can get the support they need sooner rather than later. We need provincial governments to fund overnight access and intake to social service providers so that people who need help can avoid sheltering in place on transit systems. And we need to address the issue of substance use on transit. Substance use has no place on our transit systems, so we need enhanced support programs, enforcement, and we need to look at diverting that activity to sanction areas where that's allowed.
Yeah, there's no question mental health plays a significant role with what we've seen unfolding on our transit system, the TTC specifically here in Toronto. A lot of people who have mental health issues, concerns, and are not getting appropriate help are finding refuge in our subway systems. I know your study kind of started last summer before this was an issue because ridership and these issues were just not happening with the same frequency because of COVID-19. How did it, I guess, change and take on a new face as we saw more and more violence escalating on transit in Toronto?
In many ways, we're seeing these broad social issues play out on transit systems, and they have a direct impact on the riders. And public transit systems alone cannot be the solution for these issues. So we're seeing in many cities that complex individuals who need support are just not able to get the support that they need. Whether it's shelter space, help with addiction, or mental health, many of these individuals are sheltering in place on transit systems, and that's most acute during the winter months. And that's why we're calling on all levels of government to come address this issue. During the pandemic, we saw a lot of federal and provincial support for transit operations, and that allowed transit systems to maintain operation levels. And what we're seeing now is that transit safety and security is really an operating transit issue. It's an operating expense, and we are continuing to call on the federal government and provinces to help come to the table to provide support for transit operations.
Certainly all of that takes a lot of cash. It takes, appetite from different levels of government to put that cash forward. We saw at the height of this a couple months ago, Toronto Police came out and said, we're going to pump 80 officers into the system to try to be a presence to curb violence. I guess, did you see that as a positive, as something that helped in the long term? And how do you suggest, I guess, Toronto Police, TTC Special Constables go about putting more resources into it to have that presence across the entire system?
Yeah, absolutely. The added safety, security, and enforcement personnel are absolutely needed at this time. We've seen transit ridership increase since the pandemic, and we're really hopeful that we're continuing to see an increase in ridership. But the fear of safety and security has a potential to impact that recovery. And no one should have a fear of personal harm stop them from getting to where they need to go. So we're encouraged to see further investments in safety and security personnel, We are calling on more of that to come from the provinces, and that needs to work hand in hand with outreach and support. So when it comes to complex individuals who have mental health concerns, enforcement is not the best option. We need to work hand in hand with outreach, mental health professionals working in the transit systems, working hand in hand with enforcement personnel to get people who need help the help they need as soon as possible, and then provide them with access to shelter services, to mental health support and other social services after hours and during daytime, all time of the day, whenever they need support.
No question, it's going to take a multi-pronged approach to solve this issue. John McMull from the Canadian Urban Transit Association, thanks for your time and your perspective.
Thank you for having me.